Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, social media users react with both support and criticism as President Trump shares an apparent AI-generated video depicting war-ravaged Gaza as a flashy seaside resort. Kyiv says it's reached a preliminary agreement with Washington giving the US access to Ukraine's mineral wealth, while the Trump administration views this as compensation for US assistance during the war. And as the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer gears up for a high-stakes visit to Washington on Thursday, we assess the chances of his convincing President Donald Trump to provide security guarantees for Ukraine as part of any deal with Russia. Hello and welcome to the program. We're going to begin with a quick reminder of President Donald Trump's Gaza plan, which he outlined earlier on this month. Well, President Trump suggested that the US take over the Gaza Strip, relocating nearly 2 million Palestinians, whilst focusing on clearing ordnance, removing debris and deploying infrastructure. Well, now a AI-generated video has been posted on the president's social media feed, and it's given a few more clues about this vision. Well, the video features golden Donald Trump statues, luxury yachts, and an AI-generated Elon Musk enjoying food whilst replacing Gaza's war-torn landscape with glamorous American-style holiday resorts. Well, this portrayal has sparked both backlash and support. Critics, however, argue that it trivializes the suffering of both Palestinians and Israelis. Let's take a look.
Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza #1. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance.
Okay, well, let's get more analysis. We can speak now to Michael Dubke, former White House Communications Director under President Donald Trump in the first term. He joins us from Virginia in the United States. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. We just looked at that AI-generated video that President Trump has shared showing this futuristic Gaza. Would you have advised President Trump to share such a video?
Well, probably not, only from the perspective that it is going to cause the debate that it sounds like is happening now across the Middle East and as well in European capitals and capitals across the world. That having been said, you know, the president has a unique way of changing and shaking up the subjects that people are discussing. And I think focusing on a forward-looking Gaza is something that it would be very difficult, given all of the turmoil that's happened over the last 2 years, to initiate. And with this one AI-generated video, he seems to have jump-started that conversation. Now, whether or not that's the end result, most likely not. But he has at least turned the attention to what could happen in Gaza post-conflict.
Yeah, he's talking about this riviera of the Middle East, which I should add is an idea that's been pretty firmly opposed by most countries here in the Middle East. And in really stark contrast, we heard today from the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who says that resettling the Palestinian people from Gaza would be a time bomb for the Middle East. I mean, that sounds a much more sort of familiar narrative when talking about Gaza. And I'm just wondering whether you think, you know, Donald Trump is somehow undermining brand America in this part of the world.
I don't know that he's undermining brand America specifically because Lavrov is speaking using the same terms and the same language in the same way that has failed over the last 40, 50 years. So from that perspective, again, I come back to this trying to change the orientation of the conversation, and that is something that Donald Trump is extremely good at doing. We're going to be somewhere in between. We're going to be somewhere in between the relocation of an entire population, which is what is depicted in the video as you describe it, and the rebuilding of the buildings and the infrastructure of Gaza for its citizens in a better way. So I think we're going to fall somewhere in the middle, but you've got these two extremes, the Lavrov old world view and the Donald Trump, let's look to the future view.
Okay, so reshaping the conversation, very much a hallmark of these first 5 weeks of Trump 2.0. I mean, we've had one headline-grabbing social media stunt or post after the other these last 5 weeks. Some say that President Trump and Elon Musk are using a technique called flooding the zone. And I'm just wondering whether you think this is something they're doing consciously or whether this is just the way they are.
I think it's a combination of flooding the zone and by that concept. And it's been something that is, been in sports, politics, warfare for centuries, where you take too many obstacles for the opposition to pay attention to, and you are now forcing them to pick and choose what they're going to address. That I'm absolutely sure is part of the plan here. The other part, though, that I think people are missing is the actual. You can flood the zone, but at what speed do you flood the zone? And speed is the key to what Donald Trump has been doing. With the American government, with Doge, with Elon Musk's help. And it's that speed that I think people are missing the boat and focusing on. Because with speed, the one thing that stops things in its track when you're talking about the government is other government agencies, judicial process, the media, really slowing down the opportunity to advance. And this group of individuals in Trump 2.0 has not only flooded the zone, but they've done it at such a rapid pace that it is overwhelming opposition.
Yeah, I mean, one of the terms that I saw that I thought captured the situation quite well, someone talked about what they call a blizzard of headlines. A blizzard of headlines, of course, the blizzard disorientating those who were trying to navigate it. And some say this also leaves the opposition, not just the general public, but the opposition in the United States, playing a sort of political game of whack-a-mole, where there's always a new mole popping up. I mean, how do you see the opposition faring over the next couple of years in trying to respond to Donald Trump flooding the zone with blizzards of headlines?
Right. It is very difficult for the opposition to get their footing. But once they do and they can figure out and see through, put glasses on, snow goggles on, if we're going to stay with the blizzard analogy, in order to be able to see through and see what is most important for them to oppose. So I think we're really 5 weeks into this presidency. We're at a point where it's just difficult for opponents to figure out what they need to be focused on. The bigger worry for me is that it's also difficult for allies to understand where they can lend their support to the president in his efforts. We all want to cut the size and scope of government in the Republican Party. We also want to get rid of fat and waste globally. That is not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue, but that is something that happens in government over long periods of time. The difficulty that the allies of Donald Trump are having right now is understanding what programs they need to get behind. And they're left, when they're asked by their constituents, what's happening here, what's happening there, they're left without answers. And that is not a safe place to have a politician who doesn't have an answer, or at least the image of having an answer. So my concern is not only the opposition, finding their footing, but more importantly is that allies are finding it difficult to understand how to support the efforts of the president at the moment.
Yeah, it sounds like you might share this assessment of the CEO of the global crisis PR agency, Red Banyan, a man by the name of Evan Nierman. He says he doesn't just flood the zone, he drowns it. And perhaps, therefore, he's taking it a bit too far. Now, you were in the job of White House comms manager from March to May 2017, roughly 3 months, if my maths is correct. I'm assuming, looking at these techniques, those must have been the 3 most exhausting months of your life, weren't they?
Well, it was really 4 months. It was 104 days. I was there in February. And anyway, the point, I had a joke when I was there that others, I think, adhered to, which is 1 month in a Trump administration is like 1 year. So a presidential term is 4 years. I was there for 4 months. I served my full term. It is exhausting. It is exhausting not just for the staff. It's exhausting for the press. It's exhausting for the opposition. And one of the strengths of Donald Trump throughout his career, and it's amazing to me at his age now, he can outwork, out hustle anyone else. I think the only, it's a marathon filled with sprints is the way I've described a Trump presidency. And his stamina is such, and I'm not saying this for praise. I mean, I just truly am amazed that this is an individual that does not need a lot of sleep. And it's that has been a strength of his for his real estate career as well as his political career. And for the rest of us, just trying to keep up is exhausting enough, not only doing that, but then thinking through and navigating how best to support, or for the opposition, how best to oppose him.
Yeah, so I mean, what we saw in the first Trump administration with Steve Bannon on the scene, and I'm sure you remember working with Steve Bannon, he talked about this shock and awe strategy. And I'm just wondering how different this second administration is in terms of sort of the agenda and the tactics that are being used to communicate it. I mean, do you think it is significantly more radical than the first?
No, I think, in fact, the agenda at the end of the first Trump administration is very similar to the agenda at the beginning of the second Trump administration. I think what the difference is, and what the 4 years of being in the wilderness really gave the President Trump and his supporters and the people that surrounded him. He's got a number of people that were there in the first administration. It gave them the ability to take a step back, look and prioritize what was really important for them to push on, figure out the best way to do it, to put it in Bannon's words, shock and awe. Where's the best shock? Where's the best awe? And implement it. As an example, in the first month of the Trump administration in Trump 1.0, there was one executive order on the first day of office. And by the end of the first month, there were only a dozen. There were only 12. We're over 100, I believe, executive orders and executive actions at this point. So the shock and awe of Trump 1 it pales in comparison to the shock and awe of Trump 2.0. And I think they were given the ability to take a breather, figure it out, and then move forward. But the agenda is still the same. There really isn't a change in the agenda.
Yeah, and bring some new faces in, because, of course, Elon Musk was nowhere to be seen in the first administration. He's there now. He seems to sort of take all of this up a level, doesn't he? I mean, would you say their style and tactics are similar, perhaps complementary?
I think they're similar. I think they're complementary. I think there's a level of both of them. Maybe a better way to describe it is, rather than politicians being in charge of the government at the moment, we do have business leaders, and the level of uncertainty that is being caused by Doge in terms of the missives from X, from formerly Twitter, from the pronouncements, the EOs, the executive orders, and the executive advisory opinions from the White House, from President Trump, is creating this level of, I don't want to call it chaos, but it's more of a uncertainty. And CEOs thrive in that uncertainty because it gives them flexibility to be able to make quick decisions and turn on a dime, turn at a moment's notice. That is very different than what a politician generally does, which is systematically plot out, who do I need to have as my allies? How am I going to get this passed? What are the long-term implications of this? How am I going to get support from the rank and file? All of those things are not happening now, and I think that's part of the where everyone is just in a state of panic is too strong a word. They're trying to figure out how to deal with this, and this is truly bringing the business world at a high level into a government agency, into the United States government, which we haven't seen for maybe ever.
Okay, I'm just last. I mean, you did say to us back in November when we spoke before that disruption was going to be the name of the game, and it sounds like
that's right.
That's what we're getting. Just lastly, we had a guest.
Disruption on steroids.
Yeah, well, we had a guest yesterday who said that words to the effect that he was a Republican. He said that politics is a pretty boring game. Donald Trump is making it interesting. Does that sort of sum it up in your opinion?
I think he's added drama to what could be a very stale programming. I don't know that I would call it politics as boring, but he has definitely added a entertainment level that we haven't seen. And as your network and other networks around the world are covering this almost breathlessly, the entertainment value is unquestionable.
Sure, it's hard to keep up, isn't it? Well, 47 more months ago. Thank you very much indeed, Michael Dubke, former White House Communications Director under President Trump. Thank you for taking the time to
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Coming up in just a moment, we'll be talking about the new rare earths and mineral deal that's been struck between the United States and Ukraine, and asking, how does this change the dynamic between Washington and Kyiv? Stay with us.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Paris, the world's most romantic city. People love it for its culture, fashion, architecture, and food, and is considered the dream destination of many. The French capital has some of the most beautiful and historic buildings and monuments. The most famous of all is the Eiffel Tower, one of the most iconic constructions in the world. There's the Arc de Triomphe at the end of the Champs-Élysées. The Notre Dame Cathedral, which dates back to 1163, is the most visited attraction. Located high above the city in Montmartre is the Sacré-Cœur Basilica. And of course, the Louvre Museum, which contains the Mona Lisa and many other works of art. Don't forget the La Conciergerie, famous as a prison, a historical landmark during the French Revolution in the 1790s. Here, you can see Marie Antoinette's prison cell, which was converted into a chapel in her memory. One can still follow the many traces of the French Revolution in this contemporary city. There's the Place de la Concorde and the Cour des Commerces, where the Marat, the extremist, published his newspaper L'Ami du Peuple. Seeped into the city's DNA is, of course, Paris's well-known heritage in arts and culture. Explore the cobblestone streets of Montmartre with its rich history of Belle Epoque artists and cabarets, or get a first-hand experience of the lifestyle in the neighborhood of Belleville. Get your culture fix at the Musée d'Orsay, at the newly renovated Picasso Museum, or course through the dozens of small museums and galleries you can visit in the city. Shopaholics will also delight in Paris's myriad options. From chic department stores that'll have all your fashion needs ready to famed boutiques for sheer designer items. Stroll along the Champs-Élysées or watch the fashion shows. If you're traveling during the Christmas season, be sure to check out the fancy window displays. There are also places to find the best fine jewelry. You'd also want to visit any of the famous neighborhood bakeries that sell perfect Parisian bread, made using traditional French techniques. Paris also has an impressive offering of food stops. The city boasts of 70 Michelin-starred restaurants. You'll find one for every specialty. From fresh premium oysters to award-winning edible works of art, like the famous pastries in Paris.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Thanks for staying with us here on Al Arabiya News. Now, after a week of strained relations between Washington and Kyiv, there are signs that a rare minerals agreement could be on the horizon. In short, the deal proposes that the US President Donald Trump continue providing military assistance to Ukraine, and in return, Ukraine would establish a fund contributing 50% of the proceeds of mineral resources. Well, the two nations would also jointly exploit Ukraine's other natural resources, which include oil and gas. Well, as the deal takes shape, there are reports that the Ukrainian President Volodyrmr Zelenskyy could be set to visit Washington as soon as this Friday. Well, for more, we can speak now to Carla, former US ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland and the Faroe Islands under President Trump. Carla, you're now the vice chair of the Center for Energy and Environment at the America First Policy Institute. Great to have you with us. Let's start by talking about that deal. Looks like President Zelenskyy could be on his way to Washington this Friday. I mean, that's a pretty notable development in itself. Do you think this deal is the right way to go?
Well, it seems like, Tom, every time the U.S. goes in and dumps hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars into a country, we just leave and China goes in and takes up the assets, or another country. And so at least like when Europe gave, I think, around 100 billion into this war, and many Americans think that this is Europe's war, not America's war. When Europe gave them about $100 billion, Ukraine, toward their defense, it was a loan. So Ukraine has to pay the European allied nations back. In the case of the U.S., they just were shoveling hundreds of billions. I think it's in excess of $300 billion, which many Americans would have liked to have seen invested in the U.S., where we have aging infrastructure and we need investments in our infrastructure, and prefer not to put it into wars that really have no hope of being won by our friend Ukraine. So I think that the rare earth deal with the energy deal is a good start. But we also have rare earths in the U.S., and I would like to see us also, be harvesting. We do it cleaner in the U.S. than anywhere, harvest our own rare earths and process them either here or near shore in order to counter China's really control of almost all rare earths mining and processing.
Yeah, I mean, they're very much in demand. They're very highly sought after, those rare earths. But in fact, this idea of, exchanging Ukrainian natural resources for security commitments was actually in President Zelenskyy's 5-point victory plan back in October. So, I mean, it's very well for Washington to take credit for this idea. But in reality, it looks to us as though this was, in fact, a Ukrainian initiative.
Yeah, I have no idea how much Joe Biden's, State Department had a hand in drafting that memo, though. Okay,
and what do you think of how President Biden handled all of this? Because we've heard time and time again from the Trump administration that had President Trump been there at the outset just over 3 years ago, this war would never have started. What do you think he'd have done differently?
Well, Tom, it never would have started. Putin never would have dared to invade Ukraine because Trump would have told him what the consequences would be. President Trump is a strong U.S. president. He's bringing peace around the world. You have chaos if you don't have virtuous, strong leadership from the U.S. And we saw the Hamas-Israel war, the Ukraine war. President Trump wants the killing to stop on all sides. The bloodshed of the youth, that's the treasure of every nation. Those young men should be able to build up their country, not die on a battlefield. So I'm really pleased that he's ending this. And you're right, it never would have started if the corrupt Joe Biden hadn't been in the White House.
So in terms of providing security guarantees for Ukraine, I mean, if those guarantees aren't there, I mean, there's every chance this war will start again or you know, be even further reaching. I mean, do you think that President Zelenskyy is likely to get those guarantees that he and all the other European leaders are urging for?
Well, perhaps Europe should give the security guarantees since Ukraine is part of Europe. It's not part of the U.S. And I don't know what President Trump will do, and I would never get in front of his negotiating in this deal. I would never get ahead of him, but I know he has great advisors and he has such a good sense about what's best for the American people and to bring peace to the situation. I do know that the war will conclude under President Trump because he says it's so, and he'll find pressure points in order to get to a good deal.
Sure, and indeed, European leaders may very well be stepping up to the plate. We've got the British Prime Minister heading to Washington tomorrow. The French president's been there this week. I mean, how do you rate the chances of the British Prime Minister being heard and getting his point across tomorrow?
Well, we'll see. The meeting is coming up, but Keir Starmer has said some very negative things about President Trump. Probably unwise to speak ill of world leaders. I noticed that when President Trump talks about world leaders, and they could be the most despotic world leader, he always has something kind to say in order to keep those lines of communication open. Let's not forget, President Biden, in 3.5 years of war, never once spoke to Vladimir Putin. And those lines of communication must be open. I think that helps prevent war, and it can certainly help end war.
Sure, but I mean, President Trump hasn't been entirely flattering about President Zelenskyy and has even suggested that perhaps he started the war. I don't know what you thought of that.
Well, unfortunately, and it is open source known, politicians on both sides of the aisle in the U.S. wanted this war as a proxy war against Russia. I don't support that, but they've been ginning this up for more than a decade. And the fact that Zelenskyy is president was because of the U.S. State Department installing him. I don't know if you've seen in your country the recordings of U.S. Under Democrat presidents, U.S. diplomats talking about the regime change and installing Zelenskyy and choosing his cabinet. But this is something that I'm proud to say President Trump is ending. He does not want to do regime change, and in fact is working with Elon Musk's Doge to end the USAID pressure points and disruptive groups that were there to overthrow duly elected governments around the world.
What did you think when you saw the United States voting with Russia at the UN earlier on this week?
Well, I don't know the reason why, so I just have to not speculate unless I'm read into that. I'm sure there's a good reason, though President Trump wants the war to end. And we have some countries that just seem to be run by warmongers. They want more war. In fact, I saw one European leader say, well, peace could be more dangerous than war in Ukraine. Give me a break. Peace is never more dangerous than war. People die in war. So I know that this war will come to a conclusion. Probably everybody walks away, not that happy because there's going to be some things that are going to have to be given up on both sides, I believe. But President Trump will bring it to an end, and I know that. He wrote the book, The Art of the Deal, like 30 years ago, so it's worth reading.
Indeed, I'm very familiar with that book. I mean, clearly you're a big supporter of President Trump, and I know you've said recently that he is, quote, going to go down in history as one of the greatest political figures. Are we looking here at a future Nobel Peace Prize winner, in your view?
if President Trump should have gotten a Nobel Peace Prize in his first administration when he began the historic Abraham Accords, which was the first major breakthrough of peace and diplomatic relations in the Middle East in my lifetime, I believe. And so the fact that they didn't do it makes me suspect that maybe the Nobel Peace Prize isn't I actually thought that when they gave it to Barack Obama in the first few months of his presidency for doing basically nothing. But maybe they can save their reputation by giving a Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump because of his historic diplomatic breakthroughs. This is the first U.S. president to ever meet with the head of North Korea to begin to bring some conversation to reduce the missile testing. So because he thinks outside the box and he has tremendous intuition and skills around these issues, he doesn't do things the way they've been done over and over with no good result. He actually thinks, how can I get a good result? And I think that could be a good lesson for many mainstream leaders around the world, like thinking, how can I do the best for the people of my country to make my citizens' lives better? And I think that's what President Trump thinks about every day, putting the American people first, as every world leader should.
And speaking of world leaders, I mean, which world leaders do you think President Trump rates highly? Because we're given to understand that he's got a reasonable relationship with President Macron of France. They look quite friendly in the Oval Office earlier on this week. It'll be Sir Keir Starmer tomorrow. He's described Sir Keir Starmer as being a, quote, nice guy. There's another world leader I've got my eye on, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni. And she's potentially quite a good bridge, isn't she, between the United States and Europe in this particular context. What are your thoughts?
Well, not only do I think she's a good bridge, I've heard that she's the Trump whisperer for the EU member nations. Well, that's great. But I actually think other nations' leaders could look to her and say, listen to how she speaks about benefiting the family unit, about supporting the children, not transing children, not trying to indoctrinate them, but using traditional values to increase their economy, to make sure they have a strong defense. Now, Italy has a way to go on the defense. Of course, they've got a mixed history in their economy. But the fact is, she's a good, strong leader. And I wish, this is my personal opinion, I wish we could see more of that in other leaders around the world, where they say, let me make sure that the people of my country benefit from the policies I put in place, and that I'm not doing radical policy or using what we in the US call DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, where it's basically communism in another name, or using net zero, which is communism, toward a green agenda, which is, I believe, anti-human. And so Giorgia Meloni seems to be coming down kind of in the middle, but supportive of her people. So I do think she's a great role model.
So for those people who are concerned that the United States is turning its back on its traditional allies in Europe, and, the transatlantic alliance has been strong and prevented war for 7 or 8 decades now, you wouldn't be too concerned, and you'd say people like Giorgia Meloni could perhaps hold the key to making sure that relationship doesn't go down the plug hole.
Well, I think that is the most important relationship for the United States. Many of our ancestors came from Europe in the U.S. And if we strengthen that relationship, both in our trade, getting a fair and reciprocal trade, not where they have much higher tariffs, sometimes 4 times and higher, the EU on our goods as we have on theirs. So President Trump is correcting the trade relationship, rebalancing it so that the old saying, do unto others as you'll have them do unto you, is actually in practice in trade. But also we have that great security cooperation. Most of those countries are NATO members and allies. So as they're spending more on their defense and actually getting real defenses back, which many of us gave up after the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union fell, we had this peace dividend where we all spent more on our social welfare programs and less on credible defense. That's being righted as well. And I think the Russian invasion helped with that. So did President Trump's encouraging back in 2018 or 2017 that those NATO member allies honor the Wales Pledge of 2014 and put 2% of their GDP toward their defense. Now he's talking about 5%. Let's see if they can get there.
Well, the British Prime Minister's just upped his percentage. He announced that ahead of his visit for 2.3 to 2.5. So that's something. Just want to ask you before we let you go. I mean, you were, of course, ambassador during the first Trump administration to Denmark, Greenland and the Faroe Islands. What are your views on President Trump buying or taking control of Greenland? Is that well advised?
Well, President Trump's the third U.S. president to make this proposal because Greenland is part of North America. It's just off the U.S. northeast coast, and it's the world's largest island. And it has huge seas around it. And the U.S. was really ignoring the region. When I got there as ambassador, we hadn't had a diplomatic relationship with Greenland for 67 years. Now they're saying, and this is decades sooner than I expected, they're saying they're going independent. So they will no longer be part of Denmark. Now, Denmark may try to hobble that independence movement and slow them down, but it's not going to be stopped. Greenland is going independent, and the U.S. does not want to see Greenland fall into the hands of Russia or China. So President Trump will get some kind of a deal done, and we will make sure that Greenland is secure and also that they have more opportunity for economic growth, which they really want.
Okay, great getting that from you, former ambassador to that very territory in question. Just want to ask you last of all, I mean, we've got probably President Zelenskyy going to the White House on Friday. That's not confirmed, but we think that's going to happen. Given all the furor of the last few weeks and, you know, the tragedy of the last 3 years with the war in Ukraine, how would you advise President Zelenskyy to approach Donald Trump to make sure this rift and the bad blood is consigned to the history books?
You know, Ukraine is the second most corrupt country in the world. There has been so much money stolen, American taxpayer dollars stolen by the Ukrainians, including, I believe, and this is my personal opinion, the leadership. We'd love to have our money back, but at any rate, I think that the American people are pretty done with this. They're pretty upset. I think that they have had enough, and they don't want to send more money to Ukraine. So I think that he's best get the best deal done that he can. And I think President Trump has called for them to have open elections. Don't forget that Zelenskyy suspended elections. There are no elections there. He's reduced religious freedom there. And I think that he's rolled up all the media, so he has control of the media. Ukraine is not a free country. And, you know, if it's part of Europe, it probably should be more free.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Carla Sands, former US ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland and the Faroe Islands. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, this week marked the third anniversary of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which began on the 24th of February 2022. Well, with President Trump's return to the White House, there's been a flurry of diplomatic activity aimed at bringing the war to an end. But how are these efforts viewed by Ukraine? Does Kyiv feel betrayed by the United States? And might elections soon be held there in Ukraine? Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Yuriy, advisor to Ukraine's Ministry of Strategic Industries, who joins us now from Kyiv. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya News. We're at the very beginning of the end of the war, it appears. Negotiations haven't actually started as far as we're aware. But what are your feelings as things stand as to what progress, if any, has been made?
That's a very good way to put it, the very beginning of a negotiating process. Good afternoon. And of course, we also see that this is, for the most part at the moment, it's talks about talks. And it's about setting the boundaries of the negotiating process. It's about ascertaining, what are the positions of different sides. And the working groups, the Ukrainian working group is working with the similar working group in the US. And we understand that there is some communication now happening between the US teams and Russian teams. So Look, we want to end this war more than any other nation on this planet, and we are realistic about this situation, and we hope that this negotiating process will result in ending at least the hot stage of the hostilities. But I will have to say from the start that there are certain things which we cannot compromise on, and they include our territorial sovereignty, and they include our independence, and they include a simple understanding that this war is the result of Russian aggression against our country, our people, and this has to be taken into account in the negotiating process going forward.
And do you get the impression from what we've heard from Mr. Trump and his inner circle that those red lines, as you just spelt out, have been understood?
We understand that our American partners, and they are our strategic partners, that it's very important for us to preserve our good relationships. That's why we approach this negotiating process very pragmatically, without reading too much into the daily statements and announcements that are made. You know, we have to not lose sight of our objective, and our objective is the same. We want to end this war, and the US administration wants to help us end this war. So we have told them very clearly, and you know, they know our position, and they also know that certain things with regards, for example, to our territorial sovereignty. Now, we understand that at this stage, it will not possibly be, it will probably not be possible to, roll back the situation to the level of 2014. There are still contentious issues such as the illegal annexation of Crimea. We know that it is not possible to solve all of these issues at the moment, but what we need to ensure is that the hot stage of the hostilities are over, and then we will work through diplomatic means towards achieving our goals, gradually in the future.
But in terms of putting those cards on the table in the very early discussions between President Putin and Trump, it was made clear to President Putin that Ukraine wouldn't be getting back that 20% of Ukrainian territory that's under Russian occupation, and NATO membership was off the table as well. I mean, how was that viewed, do you think, in Ukraine?
Well, we have to very carefully analyze the actual statements made by the US. And for example, the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hegseth, said it very clearly on the second day of the Munich conference that for this moment, during this negotiating process, certain issues are not on the table, but that doesn't mean that they are off the table forever. So, for example, Ukraine's NATO membership, I mean, we continue to be confident, and this is something that our European partners confirm. And just yesterday, heads of state of the more than 10 European countries were here in Kyiv, and there were all Euro commissioners here as well, and they've all reaffirmed that, Ukraine's membership in NATO is probably the cheapest and most efficient way to ensure stability and peace in Europe in the future. But if we don't, if for us to be smart and to move this negotiating process forward, if we need to, for now, put it off and, leave it till some more convenient moment in the future, I think this can be done. But, it's so obvious and self-evident that I think sooner or later it will happen. We'll just have to be patient and smart.
Okay, and with regards to patience and the time frame we're talking about here, one of the things you've talked about in the past is you've said that President Putin likes to, quote, weaponize time. What does that mean?
Well, it means that the Kremlin and its leader, they understand by now what we were saying all along, that this is an unwinnable war for them. And, they're stuck in this quagmire, which is sucking out the life of their army, because we are degrading their army on a daily basis. Yes, they do make some incremental advances, but the cost that they are paying for these advances is staggering. They are losing up to sometimes 1,500 people a day. They're losing hundreds of units of military equipment, such as tanks and armored personnel carriers and all sorts, and howitzers, and you name it. So they understand this is an unwinnable war for them. So buying time means weaponizing it, because they think that they can, if they are allowed more time, they will be able to rearm. They will be able to sign perhaps more partnership deals with countries like Iran and North Korea, because they are already really good friends with these rogue tyrants, and they're getting weapons from them. So when they're stuck and they cannot win militarily, they need time to be stronger. And every time there is a delay on the part, for example, of our partners when it comes to providing Ukraine with military support, or, when, like what we say now, for example, for us, achieving ceasefire without any substantial security guarantees is not going to work, because this will give Russia time, and Russia will weaponize this time, meaning that, month down the line, 6 months down the line, a year down the line, they will rearm and they will reinvade and they will attack again. But next time, it probably won't be just Ukraine that they will attack.
You were talking there about, the number of casualties on the Russian side, and I wanted to ask as well about the number of casualties on the Ukrainian side. But there's some new information that's just come to light. The Russian independent news site Media Zona says that 95,000 Russian soldiers have been killed during these last 3 years. I was just wondering, what's the official toll on the Ukrainian side, and does that 95,000 sound realistic to you?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I speak to our soldiers on the front lines, my friends, on a daily basis. So these, the figures are much, much higher, and very soon killed and wounded will reach probably 1 million on the Russian side. Now, as for our side, of course, we also sustain losses, and they're tragic. And our president recently, I think before the Munich conference, he said it clearly that, at the moment, officially, we have in excess of 45,000 those who were killed, and there's many more who were wounded. But of course, these figures don't account for those missing in action and those who, who pretty much are not registered. So the ratio of losses is very much in favor of Ukraine. But I will repeat, for us, every soldier counts, and every life is a tragic loss. But the reason why this ratio is such as it is because from day one, we've been fighting a smart war. And unlike the Russians, we have regard for the life of our commanders, value and try to preserve the life of our soldiers. So where necessary, we fall back, and we don't just, throw our soldiers into these meat grinder attacks and this is exactly what Russians have been doing pretty much for 3 years now. That's why their loss is so high.
There was a vote held in the Ukrainian parliament in the last couple of days to keep President Zelenskyy in power. The result of the vote was 268 out of 280 MPs, so that's a sizable majority saying he should stay there. And yet we've got Elon Musk repeatedly putting out messages saying that an election should be held. Presidents Trump and President Putin seem to be saying something quite similar. Why do you think they're saying that, given that President Zelenskyy seems to have a very strong mandate?
President Zelenskyy doesn't only have a strong mandate, he was democratically elected at the time. And right now, according to our constitution, elections are, first of all, legally impossible, because during the martial law, it is not possible to hold elections. Secondly, even if we lift the martial law tomorrow and try to organize elections, with millions of Ukrainians displaced inside country, millions as refugees outside of Ukraine, with hundreds of thousands in the trenches, it is not possible to hold a fully fledged, election that will be recognized as valid afterwards. Because for elections to be valid, the people have the right to vote, right? So if they cannot vote, this will not be representative, so this will not be recognized, neither by the Ukrainian people nor by the international observers. So that's point number one. Point number two, of course, all issues to do with the Ukrainian elections are governed by our laws. And the reason why this issue came up, I don't want to speculate, but these are just what I'll say now are just facts that can be, double-checked and cross-checked in open sources. Russians, I will repeat, understand by now that they cannot win this war militarily. So one of the hopes that they are harboring now is, okay, we cannot win this militarily. That means we will have to rip Ukraine apart from within. So the reason why Russians are insisting on or putting in question the legitimacy of our democratically elected president is clear to us, because they are hoping that if the election process starts in Ukraine, election process, look at any country right now, from the US, Romania, anywhere apart from the tyrants like Russia and Belarus and North Korea. But election process is always very turbulent and, emotions run high. And of course, it has the element of destabilizing the society. So Russia wants to destabilize the Ukrainian society from within through this electoral process. Plus, Russia wants to drive the wedge of, division in the unity, in the Euro-Atlantic unity. So why Elon Musk is saying what he's saying, I have no idea. He's just Elon Musk. He says things.
Yes, but the US president's been saying similar things. And, there does seem to be something of a war of words between the presidents of Ukraine and the United States. And that's quite serious. Overall, just to wrap up, and this is my last question to you. I mean, do you think there is a feeling in Ukraine that they have been somewhat betrayed by their friend and ally, the United States, not least when you look at what happened, for example, on Monday night at the United Nations?
Look, I'd be lying to you if I told you that everybody's happy with what they see and what they hear and what they read on the news, right? And things like yesterday's vote at the UN General Assembly is just one example of many ordinary Ukrainians. I'm not talking about people from the government, ordinary Ukrainians just shrugging their shoulders and in disbelief and thinking what exactly is happening. But I will repeat that we, those people in the government who are responsible for carrying forward this negotiating process, we approach everything we see pragmatically, and we hope that, most of the things that are being said or done by the parties, they are within the logic of the very difficult negotiating process. So if some things need to happen for the next stages of the negotiations that will end the war to take place, then okay, we can be a bit thick-skinned and don't let our emotions get in the way, and we just stay pragmatic and we just carry on.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Yuriy Sak.
Thank you.
Thanks
Tom.
again. Now, the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is due to hold talks at the White House on Thursday. Well, some are dubbing this the most important diplomatic mission of his career. Well, Starmer is expected to try to convince President Trump that the UK is serious about carrying the burden of defending itself and Ukraine. Well, President Trump has spent his first weeks back in office threatening to cut security ties with European governments that don't spend enough on their own militaries. Well, in preparation for their high-stakes talks, Sir Keir Starmer announced that he's boosting Britain's defence spending from 2.3% to 2.5% of GDP. Well, the price for doing this is going to be a cut to the UK's foreign aid budget.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so that we reach that level in 2027. And we will maintain that for the rest of this Parliament. And let me spell that out, Mr. Speaker. That means spending £13.4 billion more on defence every year from 2027. I've long argued that in the face of ongoing generational challenges, all European allies must step up and do more for our own defence.
Well, the British Prime Minister is calling for lasting peace in Ukraine ahead of that meeting with Donald Trump. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Sir David Manning, the former British ambassador to the United States, now a director at Gatehouse Advisory Partners, who joins us from London. Sir David, it's great to have you with us. The British Prime Minister will be visiting the White House on Thursday. What do you think is top of his wish list?
I think he'll want to try and establish what kind of relationship Britain and indeed the transatlantic partners can have with the new Trump administration. This has been a period of great surprises and upheavals in the last month or so. And I think one of the things he wants to do is go and talk face to face with President Trump and find out, what is his approach going to be, not just to Ukraine and the relationship with Russia, but generally, what is his approach to international relations? What can the post-war international system expect now that Trump is back in the White House? So I think that will be very much at the top of his mind. I think there'll be other things. He will want to try to build on the relationship he has with him. We're told that they already get on reasonably well. They will be, at least we expect they will be, working together as respective heads of their governments for the next 4 years. So trying to get on terms and have a working relationship on a day-by-day basis will be very important. But I think he'll also want to see if it's possible to influence the way that President Trump thinks about the issues, whether it's going to be a dialogue between the president and America's traditional Western partners, or whether we are going to be subjected constantly to surprises and to the sort of lack of consultation, which has been a hallmark of the way that Trump has approached the relationship with Ukraine.
Indeed. And with regards to their relationship, we know Donald Trump has said that Sir Keir Starmer is, quote, a nice guy. So, perhaps they're off to a good start there. But is Sir Keir Starmer going to be able to convince President Trump to give Ukraine those security guarantees that Ukraine and so many of its European allies feel that it absolutely has to have?
Well, we don't know. This is clearly what President Macron was trying to do in his visit earlier in Washington this week. It is certainly what President Zelenskyy is asking for. It is what the United States' NATO partners all want the president to do. But thus far, he shied away from doing so. And this is a source of obviously great concern in Western capitals. There is a very clear distinction between Britain's approach to the Ukraine crisis now and similarly with the French and other Western partners, and that of Donald Trump. We believe in standing by Zelenskyy, insisting that if there is to be a peace deal, the Europeans, and indeed, of course, the Ukrainians must be at the table, and it must guarantee the future of Ukraine's sovereignty and freedom. Those things are noticeably lacking from Donald Trump's vocabulary at the moment. And so the Prime Minister will certainly want to try and impress, I'm sure, upon the President how important that is. I think one of the issues here is persuading the President that this is just as much in the United States' interest as in anybody else's. Anybody can have a peace deal if it's a surrender deal. But if you send a signal that you are giving up on your friends and allies, that will certainly encourage your opponents elsewhere.
Yeah, and in terms of some of the groundwork that's been done in the run-up to this visit, we've heard from Sir Keir Starmer that he's going to raise defence spending from 2.3% to 2.5% of the UK's GDP. I mean, that's an olive branch, isn't it, to President Trump?
It is an olive branch, but I think it's more than that. I mean, clearly the timing is not coincidental. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's no secret that there's been a lot of discussion for months now about the need for Britain to spend more on its defence. The armed forces are hollowed out. They are much weaker than they have been for a very, very long time. And if we're going to be able to make a serious contribution to, not just to our national defence, but to the defence through our alliances, we've got to do better. And I think it's a cross-party position that more needs to be spent. The difficulty, of course, is where do you find the money? And I think one of the interesting things about what the Prime Minister announced yesterday was not only has he now, I think, been accelerated in taking the decision to go for the 2.5% target, but he's taken the very difficult decision in Labour Party terms of cutting back on foreign aid to do it. So here is a very clear commitment. It's a way of saying to the president. I've heard what you say. We are going to do more. We are going to contribute more both to the alliance, and in doing so, actually, we'll be able to contribute more to Ukraine. So I think it's something that was going to come anyway, because of the behavior of the Russians, the revanchist President Putin, and the threat he poses to Europe. But I'm sure that the visit provides the opportunity to bring this sharply into focus and to make it clear to the president that we're listening to what he says.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to use some very carefully chosen words, a very specific style, because he's got to stand up on the one hand, as you're saying, for Kyiv, and at the same time not annoying President Trump, which may be quite easily done. It was your successor, Sir Kim Darroch, who was the Prime Minister, the British Ambassador to the United States about 10 years after you were. He obviously had a pretty high-profile disagreement with President Trump himself. He says that Sir Keir Starmer should play to Donald Trump's ego and insist on the legacy that he may have with his decisions and his approach to Kyiv. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it comes back to the point I was making just now about how you approach the discussion or argument with Donald Trump about what to do for Ukraine. I think it's clear that President Trump wants a substantial legacy, and he would like to be seen as a peacemaker, and that's admirable. The question is, what sort of peace are we talking about? And I think it is possible, because President Trump is in a strong position, that he can, in fact, negotiate an important and lasting deal that will safeguard Ukraine's interests. And that will go down as a very significant achievement and a very important legacy. The issue is persuading him that it is that is the route to travel, and not to do a quick deal that apparently sells Ukraine out after 3 years of heroic resistance.
Of course, you were British Ambassador to Washington 2003 to 2007, so 20 years ago. It was a very different world, wasn't it? And a very different sort of administration. And we now have a new British Ambassador to Washington in the form of Lord Mandelson. Wonder whether you think he's the right man for the job, and what advice you'd offer him, having seen from afar his not entirely easy run-up to the job.
He's hugely experienced. That's the first thing to say. Here is somebody massively experienced in the political field. He's been effectively Deputy Prime Minister. He has been Minister for Trade. He's hugely networked as well around the world. He's also, of course, served as a European Commissioner for Trade. So when you look at the issues that we're now dealing with, whether it's security in Europe or whether it's the risk that Trump will impose trade restrictions and tariffs on us and indeed on the EU, Peter Mandelson has all the qualifications for engaging on those issues. The other thing to say is, of course, he has the ear of the Prime Minister. It's very important for the ambassador in Washington to be able to speak to the Prime Minister easily, because part of the role is to insert yourself as part of the discussion at both ends, in London and in Washington. And I'm sure that's what Peter Mandelson will be trying to do. So I think he's hugely well qualified for this job. He's also very transactional. I think from that point of view, he'll be an appealing figure to the Trump administration. He wants to do business. He understands that it's about doing deals. It's about getting stuff done. Having said that, and this isn't a Peter Mandelson specific point, no ambassador in Washington, doesn't matter who he is, whether he's a Brit or anybody else, will be able to be effective unless he's given the access he needs and unless he can engage with the administration. And that depends, of course, on them making that possible.
Yes, indeed. And he's got that stunning residence, which is a great piece of soft power that the British wield in the United States. The British have another piece of soft power, which is, of course, the royal family. And there's a very strong rumour that the British may offer President Trump his second state visit to the United Kingdom, this time obviously meeting a different monarch. How useful a tool do you think that is? How valuable a carrot, if you like, is that in Sir Keir Starmer's arsenal when he goes to visit the White House tomorrow?
State visits are very, very useful. They're very important. I was there for Her Majesty the Queen's last state visit to the United States. It's easy to see the affection for Britain that is focused on the monarch. And it brings you access and it brings you engagement in a way that is very difficult to replicate in any other way. The monarch is not a political figure. You know, prime ministers come and prime ministers go, and they represent a particular political position. The advantage for the United Kingdom is having a monarchy that is politically neutral and which endures. And I think that does fascinate Americans. And I think it is undoubtedly a great asset to us. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised if a state visit is on the cards. Indeed, I would expect it, regardless of who is president at the moment. I think most presidents of the United States do have state visits. I can't think of anybody who hasn't. And I'm sure that will be one of the things that will be under discussion.
Do you think, knowing the character of President Trump, and, you know, the pageantry and everything else associated with a state visit, do you think that's of particular appeal to him?
I think it'll appeal to him. I think actually, you know, it appeals to most people. It's a rather remarkable moment in your life if you are involved in one of those visits. So I'm sure that will be appealing. But I don't think one should be mesmerized by that. State visits are, you know, much more than just pomp and circumstance. There are very serious discussions that go on as well. And it is a way of making quite sure you are trying to cement a relationship through all sorts of different strands. It won't just be the president and the king. It would be all sorts of other aspects of the bilateral relationship and the actors who promote it, who would be involved, whether it's business, whether it's the arts, whether it's science, whatever it might be. So it brings together your national interests in a unique way, I think.
Just lastly, Sir David, to wrap up, I mean, we're, 6 weeks into the second Trump presidency. You know, there's already talk of this transatlantic rift, not just between the UK and the United States, but really the European continent and the United States. I just wonder if you think that's exaggerated, and what you think, just to sum up, the health of this so-called special relationship between London and Washington is right now.
I think there's a big question mark against it. I think it would be idle of me to pretend that we can be confident that the relationship that we have known will continue. We hope it will. The Prime Minister's made it very clear that on the British side, he would like not only to sustain it, but to strengthen it further. But, you know, we have to be realistic and honest. The relationship between Britain and the United States, call it special, call it whatever you want, is entwined in all sorts of ways through intelligence relationship, through the nuclear relationship, through the defense relationship. But essentially, it is based on shared values and a shared perception of the sort of world we want to be in, the rule of law, free trade, respect for human rights, and so on. And we are only going to be able to sustain a really close relationship with the United States if those fundamentals are reasonably strong and congruent. If they aren't, it will be very difficult. And it's not just about the relationship in the security sphere, vital though that is. You know, we have to think about how are we going to talk to the Trump administration on issues like the Middle East, on how relationship with China is managed, on climate, on health. I mean, these are all vital to us. And we have to see, and I'm sure this is part of why the Prime Minister is going to Washington, you know, how far can we establish and maintain common cause on those things? So I think we don't know the answer at the moment. I think we can hope that the relationship will weather this very uncertain period, but we can't be absolutely certain of it.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We really appreciate it. Sir David Manning, former British ambassador to the United States and a director at Gatehouse Advisory Partners. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Bye-bye, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for today's edition of Global News Today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.